Hello and welcome to This Is. The real question
Oh God.
is what is up with VR?
The Zuck has upgraded. He's got himself a new bit of style.
Zuck wished real hard to become a real boy.
He absorbed Linus's beard and he took it to himself. Here's the thing. There's actually some pretty big news when it comes to the Meta Quest. The Quest 3 came out last year. While maybe not quite as technologically advanced as the Apple Vision, it is an incredibly impressive headset. And what Meta have now done is they've positioned themselves to be essentially the Microsoft of VR because they are taking the operating system from the Quest and they're going to start licensing it to other companies.
I would argue they're gonna be the Android of VR.
Horizon OS, which is now what the Meta Quest OS is called, is actually a fork of Android to my knowledge. It is very, very, very heavily modified.
Forked. Like multi-pronged forked.
Aren't all forks multi-pronged? The spork?
Ooh, it is a spork of Android.
How do you feel about that as the founder and the face of Android?
I would have called it Pizza OS.
Multiple companies have announced that they are going to be building VR headsets using the Quest software, including Asus, Lenovo, and most interestingly, Microsoft.
One of the main complaints from the Sony ponies, Microsoft has no VR. We can do PlayStation VR. And everyone's like, no, this is gonna sell 1 billion copies.
Here's the thing.
No one did. I was so right about that.
PlayStation VR 1, you can still randomly find on shelves sometimes, what, like 7, 8 years after it came out. In fact, I think pretty much almost confirmed at this point that the VR 2 has been a bit of a disappointment and they've pretty much stopped the sale, or at least stopped the production.
But the PlayStation
so
has USB-C specifically for that. Anyway.
The idea here, and Meta were pretty straight up about it, was that they are going to be partnering with Microsoft. There's going to be an Xbox version. What's the phrasing? They said like
inspired by Xbox.
I'm gonna take to mean that there's gonna be a Quest 3 that's like gonna be like green Master Cheeks pre-installed on your wallpaper. They're talking about how it is going to be the world's most powerful, and Sarah Bond is gonna slap someone straight in the face.
Can it be me?
We'll be right back after a word from Matt's therapist. And there also been heavy rumors that they're working on a portable version of the Xbox that would likely replace the Series S, so that you can imagine the next generation is a Series X, big, powerful, beefy console, and then you've got a Switch-style console, which is meant to be played in portable mode, and then you can dock it, and it would likely be a little bit more on the affordable side. Dear friend and viewer, who of course is subscribed and ring-a-linged the ding-a-ling button, what are your thoughts on a third leg of this stool being VR headsets? The Xbox Series X Part 2, the Switch competitor, the VR headset, and I don't know, cloud streaming on like your toaster.
That's four. You just created a chair, not a stool. This is a way for Phil Spencer to dip his little toe in the VR pond. What they're doing here is saying, you know what? We'll slap our name on it. Let's see how it does.
Well, so the question here is, there's sort of two ways of looking at this. Now, a company such as Asus or Lenovo, it makes a ton of sense for them to license this Horizon OS, build their own headsets, and sell a VR headset. Because honestly, while it's expensive to develop these headsets, there's so many sensors and all this kind of stuff, I would argue that the most difficult part is the software. But if you as a company such as Lenovo or Asus can just off the shelf take Horizon OS, slap it on a headset, and suddenly you have a very competent VR device. And obviously they can differentiate it.
I think this is really good for the VR world in general.
What is Microsoft doing here? Because the wording in this announcement from Meta is so weird and vague, because they say that they've got Asus, Lenovo, and Microsoft on board to build the headsets or use the license or whatever. But then they also say that there's a Quest that is inspired by Xbox coming.
Here's the actual quote. Xbox and Meta teamed up last year to bring xCloud Gaming Beta to Meta Quest, letting people play Xbox games on a large 2D virtual screen in mixed reality. Now we're working together again to create a limited edition Meta Quest inspired by Xbox.
Which is already, to be fair, that's a thing right now. You can play that right now.
Yeah, like, so some of the things that like Xbox has been quietly and slowly bringing out is more like mouse and keyboard support.
The Xbox exclusives, as we've talked about ad nauseum at this point, are spreading out everywhere. Like, the Xbox team are heavily incentivized to get their games to as many people as possible, based on the exact wording of what Meta have announced. It's gonna be a colorway. It's not gonna be anything that's super spicy. But they're also talking about from the perspective of Microsoft licensing Horizon OS. And if you think about it, right?
Nope.
If Microsoft, Microsoft are the licensor, not the
licensee.
This first limited edition, Quest sort of headset, I almost feel it's like a little bit of a red herring. Like between them bringing like cloud gaming on it, that feels like table stakes. you can imagine that they could actually not only try to develop their own more specialized headset that's Xbox branded. So what's the confusion here?
You're saying exactly what I said.
No, I'm getting to the next point. If Microsoft get on board with this, they're going to help not only develop Horizon OS, but also if they really start adding some of that Xbox secret sauce.
You're just using a different metaphor. You dip the toe and acclimate the water.
This is like the beta.
I said it was the alpha.
Well, I think it's a beta.
You're a beta.
2027, a date I have completely made up and is in no way tied to anything real whatsoever. Xbox VR headset launches. You know, it's part of this next generation of Xboxes. By that point, Microsoft has spent several years developing the headset, helping Meta to develop Horizon OS, or just adding a lot of Xbox stuff on top of it, whether it's exclusive to the Xbox headset or not, who knows. But by that point, they have not only gotten all the Xbox bits of software, a little bit of Windows, whatever they want to sprinkle in there, but more importantly, they've started to really develop, as you were saying earlier, games that are specifically designed for VR, right? Now, the other interesting part of this story is the fact that this is an ARM-based headset. Now, if you will permit me to go into nerd town for just a second, this is kind of the year of ARM. Now, if you're unfamiliar, ARM is a different type of instruction set for processors, right? So right now you can kind of split it down to like Intel and AMD are like the old school x86. That's what the current consoles are based on. That's what PCs are based on. There's a heavy push on the Windows side to start moving over to that because it's much more efficient. Like it kind of feels like in a lot of ways the future. And in fact, there's a lot of speculation that there will be ARM-based processors from AMD. From AMD, from NVIDIA, maybe even from Intel. What if that next generation of Xbox, you know, there's been a little bit of speculation that maybe it's ARM, maybe it's not, but the headset could be. And if they start developing games for the headset and they start sort of making some kind of cross-platform kind of play, especially if it was a next generation headset that's much more powerful, you could see an argument here. This headset is almost like the Trojan horse for ARM-based Xboxes in the future. And then a year or two later, then that portable handheld Xbox comes out, and that also runs ARM. It's much more efficient, like a Switch is or something like that. Like
the Trojan horse.
The Trojan horse
is Game Pass. The fact that you're so blinded by your love of not
who do I love? I don't know.
ARM. You love ARMs. With the money that they save by not developing their own headset, they can just pay to put all these VR games on
Horizon OS. So Microsoft take a lot of money instead of trying to develop their own VR headset. Take a lot of money, develop a bunch of games, they put them on Game Pass, and then they put Game Pass on the headset?
Yes.
With your Game Pass subscription, your pitch here is that you will get not only games for your Xbox, you'll get games for PC, but you'll also get games for your VR headset, which could theoretically be your Meta Quest 3 or Meta Quest 4, I guess at that point. The standard for VR would be Horizon OS, and Xbox would be an integral part of that.
Yes. I want to like kind of shift away from the Microsoft side about this for a second.
Before we do that, can I give you one analogy you're gonna really love?
What?
This reminds me of when Microsoft made the Surface Duo. They committed to building a version of Android for a weirdo little piece of hardware. They kind of backed off of it after a couple of generations. But it almost feels like that, where it's like, hey, we're going to dip our little toe in to see if this is a good idea. And if they see some success and they want to like sort of continue to sort of develop and dump a bunch of money into building some VR versions of Master Chief's Adventures.
Master Chief's Adventures, where you're just wearing you just kind of like bouncing up and down and just.
Cheeks Explorer 64.
No, don't do that.
It's that in VR.
Everything's been fragmented. I bought it on my Quest, but it doesn't work on something else. Meta has not had a great track record of being friendly.
Well, they're trying. So I actually do believe.
I do. Yeah, like I think they're like trying, but they know that they suck, which is why they're rebranding as Horizon OS. Everyone's like, Meta sucks.
Horizon though,
but
that
Horizon
sounds beautiful. The Zuck is out here with a vengeance. Right now.
Yeah,
with an iron fist and a
TikTok
TikTok mic.
Yeah,
ready to rule the world.
He wants to be the one ruling the world. Obviously, the big boys are doing it with Asus, Lenovo, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But how many little boys can come in and all have the same
experience?
The same way that we're exploding a little bit with handheld games.
Yeah. So yes, the Meta Quest 3, if you want to buy one right now, is $500 to start. However, the Meta Quest 2 has been pushed now permanently down to $200. It's actually not a huge quantum leap. Most games still play on the Quest 2. And I would argue that for $200, if you're interested in VR, the Quest 2 is a phenomenal headset. I think that VR is actually kind of like We've gone through, 10 years of it being the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. The inevitability of it landing in a drawer because you're bored with it. But you know what feels a lot better is that when that is a $200 headset that lives in the drawer. And what feels even better is that instead of it being there forever, oh, you know what? Master Cheeks VR came out last week. I'm going to pull my Meta Quest 2 out.
Never pull out the cheeks. Another huge fragmentation is the hardware. So this is going to incentivize devs to start developing more for VR because it's like, oh, it's all in the same OS. But you still have to kind of dumb down a lot of the VR games to kind of work with the lowest common denominator. So a lot of the cool things about like the Quest 3 and the Vision Pro is how good the hand tracking is. A lot of things aren't going to be able to take advantage of that.
I will say that the Quest 2 also has pretty much the same hand tracking.
But not nearly as
I would actually argue
accurate.
it's almost the same.
The tiers of this is very different than like tiers of a PC. With PC gaming, it's just like, oh, we could just kind of turn down the settings. With tiers of VR, it's literally some controls, some
screens,
mechanics,
tracking.
Like, it's not just, oh, we're gonna have this run at low settings. That's why I think Microsoft's like, oh, here we got some stuff that is already included in your Game Pass settings, because there's also nothing like that on VR.
But here's the thing: if you're Philly S, which we all know that you secretly are. If you're thinking about the next generation of Xbox, clearly this is a thing, right? Microsoft hasn't said anything about it, but Meta announced it. I'm assuming that the Zuck isn't just hallucinating like an AI.
AI clearly made a better Zuck, and they made him look more human than the actual Zuck.
There's nothing. Look, what has Zuck ever done to anyone? I would argue nothing. I think he's just a real sweetheart.
He stole my social security number. What are you talking about?
So did AT&T.
AT&T didn't pretend to be my friend.
It's because we had Tom first, and we knew how good we had it.
There is an Xbox branded VR headset coming in the maybe not too distant future, or maybe very distant future. I don't know, but it feels like that's like a next natural step. Meta have already done the billions of dollars in R&D to kind of figure out the general layout of the headset. So you can assume that all these headsets are going to be wildly different. Maybe it'll have a slightly sharper screen or whatever, but it's not going to be like this huge sort of thing. But then if they have the ability for them to essentially, like you said, put a little bit of money in to bring some games to VR.
They don't have to pay anything because they already own two of the biggest VR games of Skyrim and Fallout.
Well, of course, but it's going to take a little bit of work for them to get all these games fully VR ready and everything like that. Because, wait, brain blast. What if you can take this headset and plug it into your Xbox?
Well, you can't. There's not the ports for it or the Wi-Fi for it.
Series X Part 2, Slim Edition.
These are the things that I said, they kind of limit themselves, and that's how I'm judging this based on where the Xbox was.
Now, let's be real. VR's better when it runs on a completely untethered headset. Honestly,
But that was the whole thing of the PlayStation. It makes sense that they had 6 because they want to do PlayStation VR, and then they're like, oh, you know what? We're gonna tether it. The current Xbox ecosystem is not set up to do that. You talk about it all the time. Oh, they've been developing this for a decade before it comes out. That means they knew they're like, we don't really care about VR.
Of course.
VR is not in a better place.
I'm really curious what your thoughts are on where VR is in 2024 and what this means for the future. It's gotten cheap. It's gotten good, and especially if you've got more companies on board to push it even farther. And if you've got an Xbox branded headset that maybe is a little cheaper than the competition, that has a few extra games that still work on your Quest 2 or your Quest 3 or whatever the case is, or your Quest 4 by the time it comes out, to me, this can only be a good thing. The alliance is forming to make sure that Apple doesn't just come and Pac-Man their way, gobble the whole VR experience.
I think the bigger story here is with Meta, with Horizon. That's what's stopping the Vision OS, because
it's really good and it will be on everything. Yeah, and it will be cheap and it will be affordable.
We have to assume. For all we know, Meta's gonna be like, you know what? It costs $200 per headset to license this.
They could.
They could do that.
They've burned ungodly amounts of cash to get to this point. They want people to use their stuff, and while I think they've pushed as far as they can by themselves, I think they need to kind of bring in the cavalry. It feels like Sony are out here on an island of wrong with the PSVR 2, which is a tethered headset that is clearly not a big success. If only they had, done this instead of developing their own thing like it's still 2013, then maybe that would be a little more competitive. But to me, the PSVR 2 seems like a dead-end platform. This feels like the future. Whether or not we see it next year or 3 years from now, I have a feeling that we're going to look back on this and go, oh yeah, Xbox, Meta, Quest, headset. It all makes sense. I got my serial killer board. I'm putting together the pieces. But Philly S, he's onto something here. And the Sony ponies are about to go galloping home, sadly, with their $550 paperweights.
Like, follow, subscribe. Let us know what you think about VR and tell us how Tom from MySpace was better than Mark Zuckerberg. Thank you. Goodbye.
Don't with the Zuck.
Don't with the Zuck. And Sarah.
Now.